introduce some ideas and methodologies to use mostly feminist theory to engage with Sinophone feminisms. So I was just thinking yesterday, it's kind of a crazy idea because there is a lot to cover and we have very little time. But my hope is that as we move together through some readings, through some key concepts, then maybe you will leave this experience with at least some methods, right? Which is the most, in many ways, teachers can hope for. Not to provide some methodologies that then will allow each of you individually, hopefully collectively, if you wish, to keep thinking with feminist theory, feminist study, to engage the experiences, the histories, the practices of feminists in the Sinophone. Okay, so that's, I think, the first thing that I would like to say. The second thing is precisely because what I hope to cover with all of you in the time we have together is a combination of courses that I teach regularly at Northwestern. You will notice two things. One is that, of course, I come from, I don't want to tell you how ancient I am, but I'm sure you can already see that I'm not a spring chicken, as they say in English. But so I come with this experience of being first a graduate student and then an academic in the United States for at least 32, let's say, a few decades, right? And so many of the approaches, the methodologies, the terminologies I deploy are informed and colored from that experience as an academic, which may be new for some of you. I don't want to take anything for granted. Some of you may have studied in the US. I'm not trying to say that USA rules. That's the least thing that I want to convey to you. It's just to ask you to understand that that's my experience as first a graduate student, then as junior academic, and now kind of senior, ancient academic. And so I don't want you to feel alienated. If at times you think, what you're talking about, it could be that some of the things I think about are informed by the kind of students I have and have had. For example, and maybe we can move to housekeeping.
Everything is now.
If everything is working. So you may have noticed that I've moved some of the readings, I've added some of the readings, and for one of them, and this is for July, and for one of them, which is this autobiographical novel by a Taiwanese author, Lin Han, who eventually committed suicide, you will notice that the first thing you see on Moodle is a trigger warning. And that's maybe something you don't do here, I don't know, but it's definitely something I think is important. It is a difficult text. It's a text that deals with rape, sexual violence, sexual grooming, suicide. And so I don't want to take for granted that all of you may be comfortable with this. So that's, they tell me a typical USPC thing, but if you encounter something like that, please understand that that's where I'm coming from. So that's one thing that I also want to make sure you understand. The second thing is that I will teach a course entitled Sinophone Feminisms in the fall. And one of the hopes that I have for you is that you will be able to join my students at Northwestern, if you want physically, though I cannot pay for your plane tickets, but at least virtually, because we will have a few lectures online, including one by the translator of the novel that I just mentioned into English. And so I'm hoping that there will be the chance to bring all of you together with my students in Northwestern to talk and discuss about some of the sources that you will read now and that you will read a little bit later on in the fall. So this is why I also want to make sure that you understand where I come from. You already know that, even without my self-introduction, you already know that I'm not American. Clearly, I'm also not Chinese. I'm Italian. And I left Italy because at the time we didn't have cats in Europe. So I had to go to the States if I wanted to get a good education. I was just telling some of my graduate students that if this place had existed, I don't think I would have gone to the States. But then maybe I wouldn't be here. So anyway, so this is for housekeeping. If you have any questions in terms of the readings, in terms of the materials, any concern, please email me. I have my Northwestern email. I also have a Heidelberg email. So I think, you have all sorts of ways to reach me and to contact me. Any questions so far? So good? Yes? You don't find my English too hard to understand? Okay. So, where do we begin if we want to talk about Sinophone feminisms? And we want to make sure that as we enter this area of study, of engagement, we all know what we're talking about. We all share a common vocabulary. We all, in other words, have a common set of key terms and practices. And this is where it gets really complicated, right? Which is awesome because we like complicated. So this is just a picture from a few days ago from The Guardian that tells us news that are distressing. I don't know if anything stands out to you. I know this is supposed to be a lecture, so if you don't feel comfortable talking, I will occasionally ask you, what do you think about this? But I don't want to put any of you on the spot. I also don't know your names. Later on, I may say, hey, what do you think of this? But I'm trying to behave because today is the first day. So, I don't know. And this is just a screenshot of the beginning of this article from The Guardian. I don't know if you notice anything. Just looking at it, I know I'm beautiful, but if you take a moment to look at the slide itself, I don't know if anything stands out to you. Aside from the fact that it brings sad news.
The reporter is reporting on the Me Too movement and also the pro-democracy protest. There might be a close relationship between the movement and the feminist movement.
Yes, very good. Thank you. And your name is? Shimi. Thank you, Shimi.
The reporter is located in Taipei, not in Mainland China.
Yes, this is also very important. In a way, Shimi is making already an extrapolation, right? That is very important. It's something we will encounter again and again. But the first thing that stands out is that we're dealing with a piece of news about something that has happened in the PRC, but the reporter is not located in the PRC, right? So this is mainstream English language Anglophone news outlet located in Britain, but mostly online, that has a reporter that is not physically located in the PRC. And you will notice that for most, and I would like you to start paying attention to this, because when we talk about Sinophone feminisms and the knowledge production around Sinophone feminisms, at least in the English language, the majority of knowledge, meaning articles such as this, are produced outside of the PRC. For many reasons, including that it's harder and harder for Anglophone journalists to get credentials and to be able to write, especially about these topics from within the PRC. But this is something that we need to be mindful of, because one of the things we will study together is the kind of knowledge production sources that we have about Sinophone feminisms, including our own, right? I know that it's hard. Sorry, I almost tripped and fell and broke my nose, which would have been the end of our course. But no,
We can take that table.
I'm just very clumsy. It's my problem. So I know it's hard for students to think of themselves as knowledge producers. Like when often we ask you to write papers, essays that you think nobody will ever read, including the professors. But in many ways, actually, first, professors do read the essays very closely. And second, it's not just the essays and the conversations you have in a space such as this that produce knowledge. It's what you then bring outside of the classroom and the kind of ideas, conversations, especially the formal ones you may have with your friends, that generate the knowledge. And so I really want you to see yourselves as knowledge producers. And part of what I would like to do together is, bring some mindfulness about the kind of information you yourselves put out there. As we are facing the kind of knowledge that we encounter about the topic of our course. Then, of course, we could talk more about this. Reporting in English about the Chinese feminist movement tends to be about failures, incarcerations, repression of freedom. We seldom hear, oh, isn't it cool that mainland Chinese activists are able to micro-organize and there are these short-lived but really intense digital engagements with feminist activism. Usually that's not something that is published. But if you look at Chinese language sources, especially digital Chinese language sources, we get a very different picture of Sino-feminist conversations. So also the kind of emphasis on how feminism is often a doomed proposition or engagement is something that most people will have in their mind when they think about Sino-feminisms. Okay? And the third point that I would like to make, and then I promise I'll move on, is the fact that in many ways, when we look at Anglophone sources about Sinophone feminisms, there is a tendency to default to mainland Chinese feminism. In other words, that to think that the most important things when we want to engage Chinese feminism or Sino-feminism begin and end always with mainland China. And part of what I hope to show you is that we need to think with Sino-feminisms in the plural, because historically, linguistically, intellectually, we're dealing with different agents, with different sides of engagement, resistance, with very different socioeconomic legal systems. And so we cannot just subsume all Chinese feminisms under mainland Chinese feminism. So far, so good? Does this make sense? So, let's begin with basics, or as we would say in the US, Feminism 101. Who is a feminist? What is feminism? So if I ask you, and again, not to put you on the spot, because you may not want to disclose this, but who among here sees themselves as a feminist? Raise your hand. There is no shame, right? So, who identifies as a feminist? Uh, any of you would like to say why you think you see yourself as a feminist? Again, there is no right or wrong answer, I'm just curious. So when you say, okay, I think of myself as a feminist, why? For example, I can tell you, I think I'm a feminist because I want to change the society we live in for the better, for all people, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, because I believe in equity and equality in the workplace, in relationships. And those are aspects that I identify with feminist values. Is this the same for all of you who identify as feminists? Yes.
I think I would say I'm somewhat of an uneducated feminist or inactive or rather passive feminist. Like what you just mentioned, I also would subscribe to it, and I kind of see it as the basis things should happen and process should start from that point of equality. But I must say, there's a lot that makes me skeptical as well, because somehow there's like an aura of, not radicalism, but I feel like every time the discussion goes in that way, it just gets super sensitive, super quick, and people get heated up very quickly, and just this atmosphere of discussion is something that triggers everyone in a way, and it's a difficult topic.
Yeah, no, thank you, Maya, for that. And also thank you to those of you who have your name tags, so I can see your names. Appreciate it. I think the points you raise are very important. Now, to begin with, it's not always clear, like with many things, how we come to know about feminism in our own country, in Germany, in mainland China, Italy, the US. But in many ways, there is this kind of mainstream feminism, as they call it, right? Where people say, yeah, I'm feminist, I'm, pro-women. Usually it's, why not? Regardless whether one identifies as a woman or not. What's wrong with women? For example, why shouldn't women be paid the same as men? No? The US has the equal pay law that was passed, I think in 1972. Didn't change much. In the US, women still get paid between 50 to 78 cents for each dollar that a man makes, right? But you can say, in principle, even if I haven't studied, even if I've never taken a course on feminist history, yeah, why not? But then, of course, history matters, right? Feminist identities are often associated with activism. And activism is often associated, as Maya was saying, with radical interventions in a social way. For example, fights over abortion rights, over access to divorce, and that in turn generates great heat, but also discomfort. Not everybody feels comfortable identifying as a feminist. Not everybody wants to be seen and understood as a radical feminist. Also because, and this is where I don't know German society, and so maybe all of you can help me a little bit. In many ways, the F word is associated with the idea of anger, destruction, violent revolt against established institutions. And so, for example, if we were in Northwestern, one of the things that I would do with all of you, I would take you on what a good colleague and a friend of mine invented, which is a feminist tour of campus. And what we do is visit different parts of the campus where during the civil rights movement, during all sorts of movements, including recently, feminist activists rose up and engaged often in violent protest and revolt against the university's leadership. And so this sense of discomfort, not saying, yes, I'm a feminist for certain things, but I'm not really comfortable with other aspects, is actually quite common. When we think of feminist identities, in other words, we don't think of just some personal belief. We always, often, I should never say always, we often default to thinking of feminism as activism, and not just as a personal or political identity. Also, there is this idea of a feminist can be a person who identifies with certain values, but usually activism is part of this definition, right? And so, one invitation that I have for all of you, it's not homework, you won't be graded for it, but maybe try, as you leave the classroom today, which will happen very soon, I promise, try to see if there is any place where you walk by every day that you know is associated with feminist activism and feminist projects. Is there any trace, in other words, in your spatial environment that speaks of feminist activities or feminist fights? Because I think that's also how we come to learn or not learn what feminism could be. If we're exposed to the physical traces of feminist engagements, which often we are not. So the question remains, how do we learn what feminism is, who feminists are, if we don't take courses such as this? If we don't necessarily are that interested in feminism, no? So where do we go? And more importantly, oops, sorry. No, it doesn't want to show you. It's a dancing PowerPoint. It doesn't want to stay. Okay, let's see.
What, how, and why? Okay, we know the question.
No, the question is, so, why should we do it? Why does it matter? Especially if feminisms have bad kind of associations in our mind, maybe not consciously even. And then, of course, if we think about trying to find a common language, so we all agree that feminism could mean ABC. Right? And we haven't yet gotten there. Maybe we'll get there at the end of the time we have together. And we decide how to do it. And in many ways, you kind of have no choice. You have to trust me, no? I decided how we're going to do it, just because I have a little bit more experience than you have. But I'm very open to your suggestions. So the methodologies I will bring are methodologies I've developed as a student first and then a scholar of feminist theory, gender and sexuality studies, and queer theory. So those are my credentials. And you can tell me whether or not it works. But the question is why? No? Why should we care? Why should we sit here and spend time trying to come up with common definitions of feminisms to then apply them to the science sphere? I think even the kind of bias news that are coming out of mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the science sphere show us that it's incredibly important to talk about Sinophone feminisms. Not only because there are so many humans living in the science sphere, but also because too often Euro-American feminist discourses, epistemologies, centralize white stream, as we call it in the US, feminism, and subsume all sorts of other subjectivities under a very white stream heteronormative structure. So to me, as a scholar, the reason why I'm here, the reason why I teach these courses, is because I'm really tired of always having white stream Anglophone feminists telling me what Sinophone feminism is all about. Then of course he will say, but Professor Zamperini, you're not Chinese, so what you're talking about. But this shows you how serious the situation is. The reason why I started teaching courses such as these is that Northwestern, which is a university that maybe you don't know because you don't know very well the US university system, and if you don't, it's totally fine, there is no stigma attached to it. It's one of the most powerful universities in the US and in the world. And the only person who wants to teach about Sinophone feminisms is me. Nobody else cares. And I think this is insane. So I'm here, and that's why I'm a feminist scholar. I'm here with an activist agenda. No, it's not because I get to see my lovely colleague, Professor Mittler, I get to meet all of you. It's because, to me, we really need to change the way we think about knowledge production, about the known West, especially in the Anglophone. And we need to create spaces that then in turn break down the gates that keep knowledge production all in the hands of people who don't speak Chinese, who don't care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then, of course, each of you can decide that you don't want to be an activist, but at least you should have a space of access that does not keep the same structure in place, which is a place that subsumes that all subjectivities, in a way, are not inflected by race, gender, ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status. Because that's kind of the fiction. But the reality is very different. In the US, for sure. Maybe not in Germany. Maybe Germany is perfect. And I haven't seen it yet. But, okay. So, no, Germany is perfect. Without a doubt, Deutschland über alles. So, no, but you know, again, why can't we acknowledge that each place we occupy has a history that it's really difficult, right? And if we say, okay, why doesn't, sorry, Barbara, I may be opening the door that you don't want me to open, but why is it that there isn't a gender and sexuality studies department at this fantastic university? Is it not true that this is a serious lack? Does it matter that you have to fly in a scholar from another country to bring attention to certain issues? These questions are important to ask of the institution you're part of. We will talk about feminist killjoys in the near future. That's my role here, to kind of say, hey, you know, this is a beautiful classroom. I'm really happy to be here. But let's look at the history of this institution. Let's look at the way in which this institution generates knowledge. Should it really be on the shoulder of an individual faculty member to try to change the whole system? I'm thankful to Professor Mittler for bringing attention to these issues, but it's also up to you as students. And so, in many ways, going back to this observation by Maya earlier, and also by Shamin, this is why feminist activism is often political, because it tasks itself with asking difficult questions that interrogate the histories, the positionalities, not just of the agents that we're studying, but also the institutions where we're studying what we're studying. And this is connected also to methodologies. Does this make sense? So part of my job will also be to be a little bit like asking difficult questions. And often, and some of these are here, but also with the understanding that we don't have the answers yet, right? We cannot necessarily say, oh, okay, this is the way to go. We need to create a department of gender and sexuality studies, create 10 tenure track positions, do this amazing fundraising, and then, okay, then we're done. Then we're in a post-gender, post-race situation, because then we're done, we're solved. That's actually only the beginning. And in many ways, the questions that you have on the screen now, we can try to answer them in a way now, in 2024. Yes. Sorry, part of my brain stopped at 2020. But who knows? Maybe in 10 years from now, we'll have completely different answers. For example, for those of us who live in the US, really, we don't know what's going to happen in November 2024. We don't know, many of my colleagues in many departments in gender and sexuality studies don't even know if they will allow to keep their jobs. Many departments of gender and sexuality studies in Florida have already been closed. And so people have already lost their jobs. So we live in uncertainty. And I guess what I'm telling you is that in many ways, the kind of ideas, definitions we may have towards the end of July, towards the end of our time together, are meant to be fluid. No? So I don't want you to think, I'm not trying to be new agey and touchy-feely and kind of mystical, saying, there is no definite answer. I'm not a Taoist, I don't believe in the great unknown. I am trying to tell you, especially when we enter the field of knowledge production about feminisms, that we need to remain very open-ended. Because part of what we're trying to do is to not reproduce static, dualistic binaries, man, woman, right, wrong, progressive, retrograde, those binaries that can really box us in and end up reproducing really discriminatory epistemologies. So we're trying to have a more fluid approach. And I understand that this is not always so easy. Okay, so you have the questions here that I will periodically go back to. And what I'm hoping is that, and of course I was telling Professor Mittler, I will make this PowerPoint available to you so that you can revisit it, and if you want to, you can keep thinking about some of these questions. But in terms of the one or maybe the two things that I want to say for sure, is for these two questions. Which genealogies and citational practices will we build in this course and why? So it's very important, and again, this is something I've learned over many years of teaching Introduction to Feminist Studies. It's very important not to take for granted that we all think of feminist histories, sources as monolithic. No? So when I arrived at Northwestern, they told me, okay, now you teach Introduction to Feminist Studies. I was like, okay. And so I said, can I look at the syllabi, the plans of study of my previous colleagues who taught this? And basically it was a history course about the Anglo-Saxon, Anglophone, Western women's movement. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but feminisms existed in Italy, just to begin with my country of origin, Asia, Africa, there is also North America, but there is also South America. Also, feminisms existed, depending on our definition, way before the suffragette movement, way before privileged upper-class ladies in the English countryside wrote books. So how do we create a course that is inclusive, that gives an introduction to feminist studies, but doesn't keep replicating this idea that the only feminism that has a history is Western women's feminism? That's why I asked you to browse the sources like A Brief History of Feminism or Feminism Is, because in many ways you can see what is the conventional narrative out there. And similarly, you can see, actually let me go here, that even for really important figures these days, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I don't know how many of you know her, she was a really important Supreme Court judge in the US, they're very quickly transformed into consumable objects. No? So this is one of her most famous sources that is put on a wallet, actually. What is this? Yes, a zipper pouch to put your change in, right? And there are all sorts of products. These are taken from Amazon. Products that are feminist in nature and that circulate this mainstream feminist idea. So what is feminism? Is to be pro-women, is to have judges who are women and say remarkable sentences, and then we're done. And so this in many ways is what you find online, what you find at least in the Anglophone. Again, I don't know exactly about Germany. So the idea being that even if we have all these ways in which feminism is circulating, politically, linguistically, commercially, as we see here, we actually don't really have an equitable, comprehensive, diversified way to think, write, teach, and learn about feminisms. No, not even, and in general, in the Anglophone, let alone in the Sinophone. But we'll get there tomorrow about the Sinophone part. So you will say, okay, in the last 4 minutes of class, then tell us why you asked us to read Laura Bates' piece. So I explained the part about the various ways in which feminism can be presented in the Anglophone. I asked you to look at Laura Bates because in many ways the biggest obstacle I've encountered, even with my students who take my courses, especially Introduction to Feminism, is the idea that thinking about, learning about, working with feminisms is a necessary pursuit. Because for many people, feminism is done. Many of my North American students will say, oh, but who needs to be a feminist now? We're here. We're in this very prestigious university. Heidelberg University may be cooler than Northwestern, but the idea is, look around. There are more female students than male students here. So why should we worry about thinking about feminism? Which is why I asked you to read, if you can read the whole book. I know it's a very difficult book to read. But what Laura Bates, who's this UK feminist writer, writes about, especially in Men Who Hate Women, just gives you a sense of the rampant misogyny that exists in the world today. And just because we're privileged enough to be here, I as a female teacher, you as differently identified students, but you don't necessarily experience or think of misogyny as something that permeates your daily life. I think Laura Bates shows us with this book that, again, I spend a lot of time crying reading it. It just shows you how, even if for each of us individually misogyny is done, it is actually everywhere. And what's even more worrisome, and that's something that I think if you read her book, it comes across very clearly, is that not only misogyny is everywhere, but it actually is just one of the expressions of hatred for whoever is not associated with power and influence. That we, all of us, regardless of our identities, especially intersectional identities, has to contend with. And so I know it's kind of a somber note to end on, why we need to work with feminist knowledge production within, but to begin with outside of the Sinophone. But I just want to make sure you understand that even if the stakes for each of us in this time we'll spend together may be simply to pass a course, the German system is very complicated. I read some of your emails saying I'm taking these, but I want to cut for that, and I was reading it and I thought, this is harder than getting a PhD. And so thankfully, Professor Midler did not ask me to deal with that part of the course, but I really wanted to understand that what we were trying to achieve here is awareness of how feminist studies can help us see, understand, and if we want to, we don't have to, but engage some of the challenges that exist, many of which we do not see, which are the scariest ones, I would say. Anyway, so I hope I haven't frightened all of you too much, but it's just to make sure you understand what is at stake, no? Not just a grade. So I will stop here because I think someone else
is coming into the room.
We'll see each other, those of you who want to join the class, but also if you're just interested, 11 tomorrow in 01 below on the first floor, or the ground floor in Germany by EG. And I invite anyone to join if they want to. And please return your name cards because that way Paola will be able to memorize them all tonight. She has her magic wand.
Anyway.
I also want to remind you that there is a screening tomorrow night, 6 to 8. And I really would like to recommend the film. If you want, it's one of the first real feminist films. That's what Dai Hua, I think, said about the film. I don't know whether Paola would
Well, I mean,
accept that.
yeah, no, I think it's a great. Oh, sorry. This is a Tibetan goddess. I was hoping to show you. I don't know how to do it. Anyway, on Moodle, I put the description of the movie with few screening questions. So if you go on June 19th, and oh, there it is. So you will find there a description of the movie with some screening questions for it. So it's there. It's a fantastic movie. I don't know if anyone has already seen it, but people say this is the first Chinese feminist movie ever made. Then we can discuss that. But it's a great movie.
Okay, so we start 6 sharp, right? Because it's a long film and we need to be out by 8. So 6 sharp, come here. Or 11 downstairs, right? See you tomorrow. Thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you.
You never said anything about yourself, the important books that you have written, but I will tell you more.
What the most important thing about me is that I want to share all of this with you. That's why I said I don't want an introduction. This is what I want to tell you. This is what I'm here for.
Paula.